are back at bigleaguepolitics.com, broadcasting to you as always from a secure location. My guest today is the subject of a very, very hot story on our site right now. His name is Tim Canova. He is the independent candidate for Congress in Debbie Wasserman Schultz's district. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you, Patrick. Thank you.
Now, Tim, a lot of people are very interested in this story since we broke it a few days ago. You have actually done a very brave thing. You have filed an election fraud lawsuit against Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yes, I did. I have often regretted that I didn't file a lawsuit against her 2 years ago when I ran in a primary. That time, we put a public records request in to inspect the ballots. We had to file a lawsuit, and while the lawsuit was pending, Brenda Snipes, who everyone knows now, the disgraced, now former Broward County Supervisor of Elections, destroyed all of those paper ballots when we had a lawsuit pending to inspect them.
So, Tim, you ran third party, and basically you felt that you had way more support than what the vote count showed.
Well, yes, absolutely. There had been a report published in the Floridian Press a couple of weeks before the election, reporting on a Republican public opinion poll. Now, I've never seen the poll. I don't know anyone who has, but apparently somebody has. They reported on it, and that poll showed a dead heat between Wasserman Schultz and my campaign at 34% each. It's hard to know what's happening in an election, of course. It's hard to predict the result, but we ended up getting 5% at the end of the day. When the election ended that night, it said 5%, which struck us as ludicrous, quite frankly. And we've had experts look at the numbers now. Apparently, I'm capped at 5% across every demographic, which I'm told by the experts statistically would be like winning the lottery every day for a year.
I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz has won the lottery every day for a year down in Broward County. Now, Tim, you have some very clear-cut evidence, and I looked through a list of what you have. You have some very clear-cut evidence that there was problems with the machines. There were big problems with this election.
Yes. Well, first of all, a real breakdown in the chain of custody of the paper ballots. Maybe the most notable piece of evidence is a video that went viral. A citizen had taken video the evening of the election, cars lining up to unload big blue satchels containing ballots.
You broke that.
Excuse me?
You broke that story, I remember.
Well, yes, it was a volunteer on my campaign, and we had so many volunteers at so many precincts. I guess sooner or later, one of them was bound to see something nefarious and take out his or her video camera and start, cell phone camera and start recording. And it just showed a lineup of cars unloading these ballots. Each of the cars only had one person in there. Right there, I'm told by lawyers who study this, who know the law, that that's not a proper chain of custody. And then those ballots were being loaded up into an enterprise truck rental to go where nobody quite knows. And then there was also a breakdown in the chain of custody of the electronic voting machines. We discovered, it was really Audit USA that discovered that all of these electronic scanners and tabulators were connected through wireless cellular modems. So that's almost like begging to be hacked. You can, through a wireless cellular modem, you could change the code in the software so that at the moment that somebody takes their paper ballot and feeds it into a scanning machine, that's the moment that the vote could be taken away from them, that it could be recorded in some other way.
Now, Tim, you were a Bernie guy in 2016, right?
I did support Bernie in 2016, yes, and he had endorsed my campaign as well.
Are you afraid for your life filing a lawsuit against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida?
Well, I'll tell you, Patrick, had I listened to my fears over the last 3 years, I never would have run for Congress against Wasserman Schultz. A lot of people tell me to be afraid. They've been saying that for 3 years, and I just won't give in to any kind of fear. This is the right thing to do. The other piece of evidence that's mentioned in our lawsuit is that 97,000 votes that went to Wasserman Schultz There's no indication where, how, and when those ballots were cast. It's really kind of outrageous. There's no information provided by the supervisor of elections office whether any of those 97,000 ballots were cast um, in vote by mail, election day, early voting, provisional, and some of the computer experts that we speak to say that's a telltale sign that votes could have been shifted from one candidate to another.
We have some documents up on the site which are actual instant reports uh, alleging that people who had already voted according to the machines in Broward County were given provisional ballots and encouraged to vote again, and were also handed Democratic Party flyers. What is going on in Broward County, the site of the Parkland shooting, by the way, with Sheriff Israel, with the security guard who stood outside, the scene, the location of this Caesar guy who supposedly was mailing the suspicious packages to CNN? What is going on in Broward County? You know it well. I mean, is this a banana republic down there?
In a word, yes. This is a very corrupt county. I think there's a lot of corruption everywhere in this country right now, probably. But my guess is that Broward County is kind of the epicenter of a lot of it, maybe the epitome of that kind of corruption. It's been a one-party state for a long time, where it's a very blue county. It's the bluest county in Florida, and it's been under the thumb of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her machine. There's no doubt that Brenda Snipes, the supervisor of elections, who first resigned in disgrace and then was fired by the governor shortly afterwards, that she's part of that Wasserman Schultz machine. In fact, about 2 weeks before the election, she was seen and photographed campaigning publicly with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Certainly unconcerned with the appearance of a conflict of interest. And that really says it all about the election officials here and the kind of politics here in Broward County. When Snipes destroyed all of the paper ballots in 2016, those are felonies under state law. It violates federal and state criminal statutes. And she admitted it in videotaped sworn deposition and just said, well, I'm sorry, it was a mistake, no problem. So the corruption is really very out in the open. And what's most frustrating is that law enforcement agencies have not been aggressively investigating and prosecuting any of this corruption.
Well, Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be looking into what happened in this 2018 madness in Georgia and Florida, but I don't trust big government to really do the right thing. What is your timeline with this lawsuit that you filed, I believe, in circuit court? When can we look forward to the next development in the case?
Well, we're waiting for the court to basically contact us and let us know when we're having a hearing. My guess is when it happens, everything's going to move fast. We have requested an expedited schedule and a hearing real quickly. We sued the Florida Election Canvassing Commission. We're required to under the statute, and we also sued Debbie Wasserman Schultz, also required under the statute. So we're waiting for answers to be filed by both of those defendants and see where the court brings us. But I think it's going to move very fast, Patrick. Congress, each House of Congress is the judge of the qualifications and elections of its own members. And I think it's in early January 5th, I believe, where the House is scheduled to basically rule on the qualifications of their incoming members.
Yep.
So we're hoping that the court will have this resolved beforehand. We're asking the court to invalidate the election. We're not looking for a recount, because a recount means if it's a hand recount of paper ballots, that means we're relying on the paper ballots that we have no reason to trust these are even accurate paper ballots anymore because of the breakdown in the chain of custody of the paper ballots. This is a supervisor of elections who had no trouble literally throwing out every ballot cast in 2016 in a primary. If she's willing to tamper with ballot evidence, we can't trust that. And we wouldn't want to recount on the same machines with cellular modems on these machines. So what we're asking for is to invalidate the election. And there's some precedent for this all around the country. Elections have been invalidated from time to time. And to order a new election, and this time with 100% hand-marked paper ballots that are counted by hand in public. the way it was in this country for 150 to 200 years before the electronic voting machines. And most other major democracies north of our border in Canada and most of the European democracies have banned the electronic voting machines because they understand they're inherently vulnerable to hacking, whether it's the Russians or any kind of American intelligence or big corporate interests. These machines can be hacked. The software can be manipulated. We have one expert who said that the kind of results that we got, again, being pinned at 5% across every demographic, could be as easy as manipulating just a few lines of source code.
Yeah. Now, Tim, have you received any bricks through your window? Have your tires been slashed? Have you received any suspicious packages yourself? Or have you heard from Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
I've never heard from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and she hasn't heard from me. I did not. It's funny, I ran against her twice, and I've never conceded either defeat. We had our real questions on the first time. Our internal numbers based on knocking on 10 to 12,000 doors a week showed us beating her, and that's why I asked to see those paper ballots. And then this time, the 5% figure was so ludicrous that we decided to challenge it. So I don't have any direct contact with her. Over the last 3 years, every now and then, I receive threatening messages, but I think that sort of goes with the territory, and I don't pay it that much heed.
It certainly does. That's why I have a portrait of Reagan behind me at all times for security. I know you're a progressive, Tim. Are you a progressive? Would you say you're a liberal left-wing guy?
I'm a progressive in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy, and I don't subscribe to many of the litmus tests that you see on the left these days. You could say I've got my own litmus tests. I've got my own sort of policy preferences. I've been a law professor for more than 2 decades. I've thought out these issues quite a lot. I've never needed a speechwriter or political consultants to tell me how I should position myself on the issues. It's a very grassroots campaign that I've run both times, and a real how should I say it? I guess I don't like labels too much, and I'm not quite sure all the time what it means to be a progressive these days. I see a lot of progressives out there who continue to blame Russia for Hillary Clinton's defeat, and will not take responsibility for the Democratic Party collapse, even before 2016, of course. Going back to 2010, Democrats lost over 1,000 legislative seats. And, the so-called progressive establishment in the Democratic Party, I don't think is doing people a service by ignoring the issue of election integrity. I really think everybody, left, right, or center, should be concerned that we've privatized the election counting machinery in this country.
Now, Tim, Jerry Corsi, who is also in the news, said on this show that he believes that Seth Rich was the source of the WikiLeaks emails to Julian Assange during the 2016 election. Do you believe that is the case?
Well, I will say that I've stayed away from the Seth Rich issue, and I got a lot of pushback among Democrats in early 2017 when I called for an investigation, a more transparent and public investigation. And that really still is my position. I've been reading and listening to people on all sides of this issue. Of course, there's the veterans of intelligence professionals for sanity, VIPs, that have come out with a report a year and a half ago suggesting they were concluding that it was an inside job. It was not a hack from the outside, but a leak from the inside. And that the conclusions of these vet professionals, veterans from the intelligence community, has really not been reported very much in the mainstream media. And these are people, these veterans of the intelligence community are people who have worked for almost every major intelligence agency for their entire careers. These are people who have a lot of credibility in technical analysis. So I do hope that there'll be a real investigation, but I have not been out there leading the charge on this. You can imagine how many fights that we are involved in here. You got to kind of pick and choose your fights, and that's one that I've I've not been leading the charge on.
Well, you've picked a charge that means a lot to a lot of people. Tim Canova, where can we, I mean, we're going to keep reporting on this, but where can we find more about your efforts?
Well, I appreciate that. Folks can go to timcanova.com, and I would urge folks to do so. Um, we need some financial support, small donations online. We've been fighting this fight really almost alone for 3 years, it seems, especially this last election cycle. Uh, we really were, you could say, blacklisted from coverage by the Main Street media. Wasserman Schultz, I think, scared off most people who would naturally come to support us. And we really need some help in funding this lawsuit. I've been dipping into my own personal savings to the point where probably I'll exhaust all of the savings at some point. But I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that we'd be real grateful if viewers out there would go online to timcanova.com. They could cursor down on the main homepage and they can they can read up about both the ballot destruction case from 2016, where Brenda Snipes was in the middle of this criminal activity, but they can also read about our complaint that we filed in Florida Circuit Court to challenge these election results. And at the same time, they could, I would urge you folks to go online and throw us some money and spread the word. This is a citizens' campaign and a citizens' effort to reveal and expose the kind of corruption that's going on, not just in Broward County, but surely elsewhere in this country as well.
Tim Canova, you're the man. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.